Hello and welcome to another edition of Proselytize or Apostatize. I'm your host, David Russell, along with my co-host, David Paulman. What's up, David?
How's it going? Good to see you again, Russell.
Yeah, nice to see you, man. How are you holding up there?
Well, apparently there was murder in my neighborhood today, so that was exciting. But yeah, other than that, everything seems to be, I wouldn't say good because we're on lockdown, but about as good as it can be in a state overrun with coronavirus. So yeah.
Yeah. If nobody knows, I'm sure most of our viewers do, but David's in New York, where it was front and center. So you had some fun today, David. You went on Skeptics and Seekers today.
Yes, debated intelligent design with David Johnson. I don't know what it is, but it's really frustrating to debate with him. I mean, I like him, but he's frustrating to debate with.
He's a great guy, and for those that don't watch, Skeptics and Seekers is another podcast that we've been a part of, and David Johnson's the host over there. So if you want some good conversations, go check him out. His podcasts run a little bit longer than ours, but today we have a very cool debate. It's kind of like intelligent design, but it's the teleological argument, the argument from design. And we've got two special guests with us. We have Mike Child. Say hi, Mike.
Childs with an S, but
Childs with an S.
all good.
Yes. Why don't you introduce yourself, Mike?
All right. Yep, Mike Childs. I'm originally from Chicago. I'm currently living in Indiana against my will, and I basically I run a tiny Facebook chat room called Theological Crossroads. That we got about 1,200 people in there, but it's still pretty small. But we try to keep things civil and try to keep the animosity out. We don't take kindly to people just coming in and yelling beef at you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Coming out of the gate aggressive kind of stuff. That kind of stuff just rubs me the wrong way. But things still get heated, of course. But we try and make sure that things don't get too out of hand.
Yeah, that's what we try to do here. We try to really just be chill and just have good conversations here as well. Our next guest is Travis Lee. Introduce yourself, Travis.
Okay, so I'm Travis. I've been a Christian for almost 3 years. I'm a former atheist. In fact, I grew up secular, but upon really getting into this stuff and looking at the evidence, I eventually became convinced that Christianity is true and that God exists. And I'm here in Dallas, Texas. I'm not really involved in YouTube so much as I do outreach ministry to the homeless. Of course, that's kind of been shut down quite a bit recently. But other than that, yeah, I'm going to be defending Christian idealism tonight.
Awesome. Well, have you felt the heat wave of Copeland's heat wave, God's heat wave, his wind? Have you felt it yet?
Yeah, I'll blow the wind of God.
There you go. Right.
In my head, I can't get that song out of my head.
Right? Yeah. It's pretty catchy. But tonight, guys, we're gonna. Tonight we're gonna. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
If I could just add real quick, just because Travis mentioned it, I actually was a former Roman Catholic. I was raised most of my life as a Roman Catholic, and I was actually this close to going to seminary at one point in my life. But I ended up studying. My story is actually very close to Matt Dillahunty, except I was a Catholic instead of a Baptist, and it was actually my studies of the Bible, preparing to do that led to my becoming an atheist. So it was very interesting when I saw the Dillahunty story, and was very similar in that regard. So just thought I'd add that. I don't know why I left that out.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Sometimes former atheists make the best theists, and former theists make the best atheists.
It's true sometimes. Yeah, well, it's great that we found you, Mike. I'm glad you responded to my plea for another atheist guest. We have a group that usually comes on, and I'm trying to diversify a little bit and trying to get other perspectives as well instead of having the same guys on. And David usually picks up a theist here and there like Travis and brings them on, but we do have some returning guests on the show, and I'm really excited tonight because I love the teleological argument, and I love to hear the perspectives of each person. So we're going to give our opening statement with 12 minutes, and up first will be Travis. Travis, you are on. I will start the timer whenever you speak your first word, sir.
Okay, thanks. And, I appreciate coming on. And so, again, it's important to make one thing clear about what the fine-tuning argument is not. It is not that the universe is perfect, or even that God created the universe for our personal comfort. It's like we're his pets or something along that line. But rather, we're here to exist for a short amount of time to fulfill certain purposes, similar to a sort of a soul-building free will theodicy. Okay, so to begin, I'm going to be defending quantum idealism. So according to studies in information theory, specifically pancomputationalism, shows that the universe at its most fundamental level functions remarkably similar to what we're studying in computer science. And everything that goes on in it can be explained in terms of information processing. In fact, every process in the universe can be reduced to interactions between subatomic particles that produce binary answers. Yes or no, here or there, up or down. This would mean that nature at its most fundamental level is the flipping of binary digits that run a specific program. Then I would take this, as well as studies in quantum cognition, which show that information processing in entangled states is the product of a mind, and form this argument. Information processing is the product of mind. The universe is governed according to information processing. Therefore, the universe is governed according to a mind who we call God. Then, from a classical point of reference, I'm predominantly going to be defending this argument from a scientific point of view. Okay, so to kind of go through the data, at about 10 to the minus 35 seconds after the Big Bang, we see the fundamental force breaks into the four fundamental forces of nature, which are electromagnetism, gravity, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. Now, for life to be possible, more than 40 different elements must be able to bond together to form molecules. Molecular bonding depends on the strength of electromagnetism and the ratio of the electron mass to the proton mass. We must have the precise function of the electromagnetic force, otherwise atoms would hang on to electrons so tightly that no sharing of electrons with other atoms would be possible, or the opposite possibility that atoms would not hang on to electrons at all. And again, the sharing of electrons among atoms which make molecules possible would never take place. In fact, if more than just a few kinds of molecules are to exist, the electromagnetic force must be even more delicately balanced, because the size and stability of electron orbits around the nuclei of atoms depends on the ratio of the electron mass to the proton mass. And unless we have the precise mechanistic function that we have, the chemical bonding for life chemistry could never take place. Now, in the case of the strong nuclear force, which is the force governing the degree to which protons and neutrons stick together in atomic nuclei, we must have the precise function, because if this force were too weak, multiprotein nuclei would not hold together. In that case, hydrogen would be the only element in the universe. On the other hand, if the strong nuclear force were even slightly greater than what we observe in the cosmos, protons and neutrons would have such an affinity for one another that not one would remain alone. In that case, they attach to too many other protons and neutrons, and in such a universe, there would be no hydrogen at all, only heavy elements. And again, life chemistry would be impossible. In fact, if the strong nuclear force did not function exactly as it does, stars would so rapidly exhaust their nuclear fuel, they would make any kind of physical life impossible. Not to mention, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen would be unstable, yet again, making life impossible. Now, with the weak nuclear force, which governs, among other things, the rate of radioactive decay, if it were not precisely as we observe, the universe's matter would quickly be converted into heavy elements, or matter would remain in just the form of the lightest elements. And in either scenario, life essential elements like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus would either not exist at all, or exist in amounts far too small for all the life essential molecules to be built. Then with the gravitational force, which determines how hot the nuclear furnace in the core of stars will burn, if the gravitational force were any different, stars would be so hot they would burn up relatively quickly. In fact, too quickly and too erratically for light. Additionally, if the gravitational force were any weaker than what we observe, stars would actually become hot enough so that they would ignite nuclear fusion, and in such a universe, no elements heavier than hydrogen and helium would have ever been produced. Now, when the fundamental force broke off, matter and antimatter were created in almost equivalent amounts. At 1 millisecond of time, the universe cooled enough for quarks and antiquarks to condense out. Any quirk encountering an anti-quirk, which would happen quickly at this high density, resulted in the complete annihilation of both and the release of a photon of energy. But the symmetry between matter and antimatter was not quite precise. For about every billion pair of quarks and antiquarks, there was an extra quirk. And it's actually that tiny fraction of the initial potentiality of the entire universe that makes up the mass of the universe as we now know it. So the question is, why did this asymmetry exist? It would seem much more natural for there to have been complete symmetry. But if there had been complete symmetry, the universe would have quickly devolved into pure radiation and nothing would have ever come into existence. As theoretical physicist Dr. Michio Kaku states, by natural forces alone, our universe should not be here. Then further contingent upon this, some other factors in the evolution of the universe that must be precise in order for us to be here include the correlation of the electromagnetic force constant to the gravitational force constant, the ratio of protons to electrons, the velocity of light, the entropy level, the mass density of the universe, the average distance between stars, and of course, one of the most precise at 1 and 10 to the power of 120 is the cosmological constant, or dark energy. Now, when we start focusing in on our own solar system and planet, which is actually my field of study, another critical factor is the planetary collision about 4.5 billion years ago at a 45-degree angle, which formed our moon and subsequently replaced Earth's thick, inhospitable atmosphere with one thin enough for light to pass through. The new atmosphere had the just right precision to allow life's existence. This planetary crash at a 45-degree angle resulted in our planet with its surface gravity, surface temperature, atmospheric composition, atmospheric pressure, iron abundance, plate tectonics, volcanism, rotation rate, rate of decline in the rotation rate, and stable rotation axis tilt, all in the just right range to support advanced life. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on that I'm actually in the process of studying is the greenhouse gas removal. So in the erosion process, water from rain, streams, and mist catalyzes the chemical reaction between silicates and atmospheric carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. The end products are carbonates and silicon dioxide. So in order to get the necessary amount of exposed silicates, efficient plate tectonics must build up islands and continents. The rate of silicate erosion depends on the Earth's rotation rate, the average global rainfall, average global temperature, the chemical composition of Earth's atmosphere, the total area of Earth's land masses, the average slope of Earth's land masses, and the quantities and types of plants on the land. And organisms like photosynthetic plants and bacteria and others take carbon dioxide, water, and methane from the atmosphere and chemically transform them into sugars, starches, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And if these get buried before they decay or get eaten by other organisms who then get buried before they decay, then greenhouse gases are converted into biodeposits through chemical processes operating in the Earth's crust. Now, fine-tuning the removal of these greenhouse gases to compensate for the increase in solar luminosity requires the fine-tuning of all 7 factors that govern silicate erosion, plus all the factors that govern the abundance, diversity, growth, decay, extinction, and burial of organisms, which must be precisely as it's been throughout the past 3.5 billion years. Now, I could literally go on and on about, specific scientific data, which supports my view, but I think we have enough now based upon the data, as well as studies on the philosophy of mind, to deduce the following. Intentional states are the product of mind. The fine-tuning exhibits an intentional state or desired outcome. Therefore, the fine-tuning is the product of mind, and this mind is who we call God. So with that, I'll go ahead and throw it over to Mike.
All right, thank you. Hey, Mike, you're up, man. Your 12 minutes starts whenever your first word starts, bro. You're on mute, bud.
I can't hear.
There we go. Got me? Okay. All right. So it's important to, I think, begin by understanding what my job is here. As the non-believer, I am not the one claiming either that God exists or God doesn't exist. And I want to make it clear that my position is not that God doesn't exist. It's never been my claim, and I'm not claiming it now. we're here to discuss this particular argument. And so it's my job to basically try and help people to understand whether or not the argument is sound. And that is kind of where my, I hesitate to call it my expertise, but it's my stronger suit, is dealing with logic on its own merits. And in this particular instance, this argument, it takes many forms. I mean, if you start with Aquinas and work your way up from who was it, Paley's argument and a number of others, but it more or less takes roughly the same form, which is arguing from design. We look at the universe and we see design, and therefore it must be a designer, which from the most simplest way of looking at it sounds great, but when we look at it a little deeper and try and really examine the way we look at it, it kind of starts to fall apart. And then to ultimately come to the conclusion that a supernatural cause was what made it so is even a bigger problem. That ultimately is what the apologist in this case has to be able to argue. He has to be able to look at this and posit not only that a supernatural cause is possible, which we don't even know is the fact of the matter, but then that it did actually do these things. So that's ultimately the biggest question, because ultimately at the expense of the argument, it always comes down to, and then the designer is God. And then we say, well, what is God? And the person has to define God. And we ultimately always come to, I'm sorry, I'm saying ultimately a lot. we come to the fact that the belief is in this supernatural being that they have given the moniker of God. So that is case number one. Then ultimately we I did it again. We can take pieces of that argument and break them down, and it comes to things like fine tuning and what. I'm going to peek at my notes here for a second. They talk about fine tuning. They talk about the odds of things coming into existence, and we can basically work around those things, and it kind of doesn't matter what the odds were, but we still have to say, how did you come to decide that the odds were in the favor of your preferred explanation versus anything else? And I think that can be argued to a point where it doesn't really matter, because ultimately what turns out to be the case is that we don't have enough information to even calculate the odds. For example, if you were to roll a dice and all you knew is that you rolled a 1, and you know the person you're speaking to said, I rolled a 1, what are the odds of that happening? Someone might assume a 1 in 6 odds of that being the case, but we don't know how many sided die we were working with. It could have been a 6-sided die, 12-sided die, 20-sided die. It could be a die that has multiple 1s on it, things like that. So we don't have all the information with which to calculate those odds. This kind of argument runs into those kinds of assumptions over and over again. And when we talk about the Earth being fine-tuned, what would lead one to believe that? I'll grant all day long that the universe is certainly complex in appearance and operation, at least complex to our feeble human minds, but we are understanding more and more with each passing day. But the simple reality is that despite the inevitable insistence from the opposition, complexity is not a hallmark of design. Simplicity is. And I can confirm this as a former designer. I used to be a web developer for about 5 years. And if you ask any designer, they will tell you that a good design comes from simplicity and ease of use. If you think about the evolution of phones, for example, think of the iPhone has 1 button on it, and yet somehow my mother still can't figure it out. But that's mostly due to a plethora of features and things like that. One aspect she has no problem with is using her phone as a phone, which is, of course, its primary use. And running apps, she can do that and spend her money very easily. There's nothing simplistic about the universe, though. We're still trying desperately to figure out, and don't even get me started on quantum mechanics. Proponents of design typically look at the eye and call it complex with its rods and cones and say that it works perfectly. And so perfect, it couldn't have been anything but designed. Leaving out for the moment that that's a classic argument from ignorance fallacy. The eye is without question not perfect. One could easily approach the other, excuse me, lost my train of thought there for a second. One could easily approach any other human on the human being on the street and eventually get an idea for how the human eye could be more optimized. And, you know, 360-degree peripheral vision, for example, would be a great optimization. So if you can take any aspect of human design and optimize it off the top of your head, then it kind of pokes holes in the idea that a proposed perfect creator was responsible in any way. So these are the kinds of things I hope to touch on as we go. I won't take it further beyond that for the sake of time.
All right, gentlemen. Well, both of y'all finished really early on that one. Travis, I'm going to give it to you to give you a 5-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll kind of rebut what I can because, like, a lot of it really didn't apply to my specific arguments. But I know one of the objections we get to is like, so why is this God? And what I'm arguing for is quantum idealism, namely that there's a mind behind the universe, and this mind is who I call God. Now, where that comes from, studies in quantum cognition, quantum decision theory, states that information processing in entangled states is the product of mind. Space-time, under Sean Carroll's model, emerges from information processing in an entangled state and is governed by information processing, which is the same mathematical descriptions of like thought and mind. You know, we discovered that, you know, in Hilbert's, that's the same properties that space-time emerges from. And then also, I would argue that the fine-tuning shows a state of intentionality, which again is another property of mind. So as an idealist, I'm simply defending that consciousness or mind is fundamental. Now, you kind of touched on the dice analogy, and let me kind of address that. That's not really what I'm arguing because, like, for instance, what are the odds of, you know, drawing an ace of hearts out of a deck of cards? I mean, it's extremely unlikely, but it would have no significance, no purpose, or nothing. What we're talking about is galaxies and universes coming into being. So it's not just a matter of probability or improbability. I mean, that alone won't get you anywhere. It's the mechanistic function that's responsible. So it's not really, that's kind of a faulty analogy. Now, you said that, you know, we're kind of starting to learn more and more about science. And yes, you're absolutely correct. In fact, that kind of works in my favor because we're seeing that the fine-tuning parameters are growing exponentially every year. And then I know you touched on the eye and things of that nature. But as a theistic evolutionist, I accept that things came about by natural processes alone for a specific purpose. So I'm not even going to be defending that. And in fact, I probably agree with you. So yeah, I'll just take it from there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're at least a proponent of evolution. That's a load off my mind. That's a whole series of stuff I don't have to touch on then.
There you go. Yeah, and Mike, you're good to go for your 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Well, unfortunately, I'm struggling to fully grasp exactly how to go about addressing your position where it is. I'm not really following it, to be perfectly honest with you. You touched on a number of things that I honestly can't even recall at the top of my head at the moment. But it came down to a lot of these rare instances seem to happen. Therefore, they must have been driven by an intelligence. Is that more or less what you were touching on, if you could simplify it, maybe take a minute and simplify it a little bit for me, because it kind of went a little quickly, and I wasn't able to fully recall things to grab onto to address.
Okay, sure. So I guess we'll go ahead and start the back and forth.
Yeah, guys, that's fine.
All right, I would say, like, before, sometimes, you know, we've allowed people to kind of use their rebuttal period to just kind of clarify what the other position is. So I was going to kind of let Michael lead with questions there, and yeah, we'll just go to the you know, back and forth from there.
Okay, yeah. So let me just, like, briefly clarify my position. What I'm saying is that as an idealist, at the subatomic level, everything we see in the universe functions similar to like a quantum computer, like binary digits, ones and zeros, yes or no, here or there. And that it's built on information processing, and that space-time is emergent from and functions under the same things that quantum cognition says are the properties of mind. And then contingent upon that, I kind of addressed, and to kind of really simplify it, that, like, we have the fundamental force that breaks off into four, and I showed how we need the precision for molecular bonding, for the subsequent evolution of the universe. How the gravitational force has to correlate with the electromagnetic force, and how we have factors like in the silicate erosion process, that compensates for the increase in solar luminosity. Just these various things that are show a state of intentionality. So what I'm saying is that my position is like in defense of quantum idealism. A good way to look at how I defend the fine tuning is sort of like when you have pan-computationalism, think of uploading information into a disk to run a specific program. That's what we have with the fundamental force break. If that clarifies.
I'm sorry, I'm getting this weird static, and I'm just having a real hard time hearing you right now. And that's my biggest problem at the moment.
Travis, would it be okay if I kind of tried to summarize your view and see if I've got it right?
Sure.
All right, so it sounds to me like he's kind of making two arguments here. I'm hearing, first of all, from stuff that we're seeing in physics and on the quantum level and stuff, it sounds like you're saying this looks like activities that we see in a mind, so kind of, see the analogy there. And then also kind of an argument from intentionality. So I'm seeing two distinct arguments here. An argument that things on the quantum level look like they correlate to what we see in mental activity, but then also that from also certain features of the universe, it looks like we've got intentionality. Is that an accurate assessment, Travis?
Yes, very good. That's a perfect assessment.
Okay. Okay, intentionality. It's one that it's kind of like the puddle in a hole, analogy that I'm sure we've all heard. It kind of falls on that for anyone who might be watching. The puddle wakes up, if it has, had cognizance, it says, boy, I sure fit in this hole really well. It must be designed for me. That's something that would be a situation where intentionality would appear to be the case, but of course isn't. It's in fact the subject, which is the puddle in this case, adapting to its surroundings. And that's very much what the evidence typically would point to in terms of, science, the way, our understanding of how the planets form, the universe, and life can all be explained with natural processes without the use of a conscious mind with deliberate intent. And that cannot be demonstrated to fulfill the requirements of a sound logical argument.
Okay, so you're basically appealing to the puddle analogy, to which I would apply the firing squad analogy, which I think answers that very well. And to kind of lay that out, that's like, say, someone's condemned to death by firing squad. So they're blindfolded, and they have 20, armed marksmen who all fire the shots. And then, the guy realizes he's not hit. So he takes his blindfold off and he says, well, of course I wasn't hit. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So that does nothing to explain why things are the way they are. In fact, it's simply an appeal to remain in ignorance about it, kind of shrug our shoulders. So that doesn't answer anything at all. And in fact, that objection is not even taken seriously in academia. that's sort of like a lay level objection that just does not really work.
Well, I wouldn't call it a shrugging of the shoulders or even an appeal to complacency. It's more or less just the fact that we don't know. And the evidence points to one thing, but the fact remains is we still don't know. And the reasonable position is to remain in a state of we don't know and not fill it with all of the, I mean, there's frankly an infinite number of possibilities. When we're talking about designer can mean so many things. And if you don't subscribe to a supernatural cause, then designer could be any number of things, including the possibility of a supernatural cause, but it could be anything from alien life to some other really powerful being, but isn't necessarily God or form of God. There's just an infinite number. But then if you are then to turn around and say that it must have been a supernatural cause, you still have to show that the supernatural is a real thing, that it's even possible, and then build from there as to how you can tell that the supernatural cause that you are positing is still the thing that is responsible.
Okay, so quite a few things I need to touch on there. First of all, again, that's kind of like saying, well, we just don't know. Well, it's the job of science and philosophy to actually look into these things. So again, that's like shrugging of the shoulders. But you talk about, the plausibility of aliens and so forth. So I'm curious on that hypothesis. How do you avoid the problem of an infinite regress if you want to apply that? Because those aliens would need aliens to create. It just goes on and on.
I mean, infinite regress is one of those things that's been touched on, but ultimately the idea that, okay, so we regress into what? What's the assertion here? That infinite regress means that we can't just keep regressing on and on forever and ever, because we don't, there wasn't, I don't know, I'm struggling to remember exactly what the typical argument is, but the idea that we can't, so, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so, what the kind of theory is, I can help you with it, I actually know about it. It's that, okay, so there's an infinite multiverse, and then in one of these multiverse, there's a super intelligent group of aliens who, have advanced computers, and they kind of, with the computers, like project our universe out as like a hologram or a simulation, if you will. But then who created the alien? Who, and is projecting them? Then who would be projecting them? And so that doesn't really work as a plausible explanation for the universe.
Well, yeah, and that ultimately just begs the question: if you're going to then posit God, then of course we have to ask who created God. And
okay, I would love.
We run into the exact same problem. I mean, God is part of the infinite regress problem.
No, okay, God, because what I'm saying is that even if you have, in other words, multiverse, if you want to apply that to the fine tuning, it doesn't really work, and we can kind of get into that. But the thing with, if you have a transcendent causal agent of the information behind space-time, that's any spatial temporal dimensions whatsoever. That being is not going to be constrained within what we consider time or space. It's going to be multidimensional. And so these rules of needing space or needing time do not apply to the causal agent of everything.
Okay, so if God is beyond space and time, is
transcendent.
Sorry?
Transcendent, which would be both beyond, or he would transcend it and interpenetrate it simultaneously.
I'm not sure that that's even possible, but if we're talking about a being that is timeless, then what can we say about a being that has existed for 0 seconds and is nowhere?
The problem with doing that is you're ascribing our laws of physics to a being who would transcend the universe with its 10 plus dimensions, because time is linear and it's something we have to go through. But the causal agent that created time is obviously not going to be bound within time itself. So that, that wouldn't even apply.
Well, that's an assertion. I mean, we don't know that that's necessarily true.
No, actually, it's not. Because we can, through string theory, there's about 10 dimensions in our own universe. And if our universe, the causal agent of our universe, would necessarily transcend the 10 plus dimensions, and we only exist in 4, length, width, height, and time. So yeah, it would be a necessary component of the causal agent.
Well, unfortunately, you're touching on a subject I know nothing about. I'm absolutely, completely ignorant to what string theory has to say. But,
and gentlemen, I was going to say also that, and I don't want to cut you off, Michael, but I was going to say that's kind of getting into like cosmological sort of arguments there as well. And if it's all right with you, let's try to take it back to the design argument. Is there evidence for kind of intelligent agency in here, and not really is there evidence for a first cause?
Yeah, I also got a question here, and I think Mike brings up a good point here. Is that why God? Why why does it have to be God? Why does this designer have to be God? Why can't it be something natural that comes into being? And that's kind of like because you're like, he's necessary, and he's in these 10 dimensions, but I don't see where we've ever penetrated past this dimension to be able to assert that. And I think that's what he means by assertion. Am I right, Mike?
Yes.
Okay, so going back to that, and yeah, that's a good point. But what I was trying to say, and this kind of does get back into the cosmology a little bit, is that let's just say the 4 dimensions that we exist in. The causal agent would necessarily transcend those dimensions because he created them. Now, going back to why God, what I'm saying is that the universe is emergent from and is governed by the same properties we describe of mind. So what I'm saying is that the universe emerged from and is contingent upon what we consider mind, consciousness.
Okay. So Travis, if I'm just hearing you correctly, you're saying you're making an inference here, and so then I would bust that back to Mike and say, well, Mike, why is it unreasonable to make an inference to this mind, this supernatural mind or being? Why is that a problem? Because if I understand it, you make a hypothesis, you start a hypothesis, and like David always says, you don't have to prove the candidate hypothesis before you can research it and search it out, which is how scientists work. So why is it unreasonable to make that inference when he's finding evidence to support his inference? Is that right? Does that sound right, guys?
Sure.
So that would be to you, Mike. I would wonder that.
Could you do me a favor and just whip that by one more time?
So I was going to say that was a little unclear, Russell.
Go ahead. Rephrase it for me, Dave.
Yeah, the way I would ask that question would be more like, so he's kind of putting God out there as a hypothesis and then saying, look, I've got evidence here in the universe that fits really well with this hypothesis. So why is it, are you saying he has to prove the hypothesis before he can give evidence for the hypothesis, which would seem unreasonable? Or are you just saying that, the evidence is either wrong, it's what he's saying isn't true, or that the evidence does not necessarily lead to the conclusion of God and that you've got some other sort of explanation?
What would be that other explanation?
Well, that's what I was asking Michael.
We don't really need another explanation, and that's part of the fallacy, is that we don't just because we don't have a better explanation, but ultimately what you're doing right now is a classic argument from ignorance fallacy, where you're literally saying, I can't think of a better reason, therefore it must be my reason, because that's what I'm most comfortable with. And
okay, so let me just touch on it, because this is really important. I'm going off the scientific data that we do have, like studies in quantum mind, studies in, like the fine tuning that we can actually observe, that we have evidence for. In fact, everything we look at has to be exactly as it is in order for us to be here, in order for even molecules to bond together. I mean, everything. In fact, as time goes by, the evidence for the fine tuning is growing and growing. So I don't see that at all.
Well, okay, I've heard you mention fine tuning several times now. What about the universe is fine tuned? I mean, what is the and what is the purpose for it? Everything that we look at, the universe certainly isn't meant for us, for humans. Which, if we want to go to even a biblical source that claims that the world was given to humans to do with as we please, and we reign over the animals, that clearly isn't true. We, you know,
that's really not what I'm saying is that, like I said in the opening, I'm not saying that God made this universe for our personal comfort, like we're his pets. Like, quite the contrary. I don't believe that. I'm saying that, we're here to serve a purpose. We're here like for a short amount of time. In fact, I would say that the fine tuning grows exponentially as you go to like what's needed for bacteria, to what's needed for plants and animals, to what's needed for humans, then what's needed for humans to say launch global civilization and technology. And the fine tuning grow with each one. And I'm saying that to me, and then also with everything in the universe pointing in the same direction, that shows a clear state of intentionality, which we know is the product of mind. So I think these are reasonable inferences, and I really haven't heard a very good objection to them.
I think what the evidence shows is that complexity is certainly growing, but not tuning. And tuning is done with a subject in mind. When you're talking about tuning, you tune it for something. Like when we tune our radios, we do it for ourselves so that we, get the right sound, find the right frequency, make sure that it sounds the best for us. That's just a simple analogy. When you're talking about fine-tuning the universe, what is it tuning it for?
Yeah, Travis, I also wanted to raise this point because, when he had asked you what's it for before, you had said that, that God gave us, a short time for a purpose. But, it was kind of vague to me, like, what do you actually think this purpose is?
Right. I would say sort of apply it, like I said before, it's like a soul-building free will theodicy, that we're here, to exist for a short amount of time with an offer of redemption, to love our fellow human beings, and to spread the gospel. And in fact, what's interesting is there's a massive amount of fine-tuning that goes into the technology, in fact, that we're using for this, that can be used to spread the gospel.
Thoughts on that?
I'm struggling to understand how that answered the question.
Maybe you could repeat the question, Travis.
I think
David,
yeah. Well, what it sounded like to me is that Travis's answer was basically, kind of traditional. Forgive me, Travis, you might take offense at this, but it sounded like he basically gave a traditional Arminian, explanation for why we exist. That we're here to love God, to spread the gospel, and to love our fellow man. Is that a satisfactory answer to you, Michael, or were you looking for something a little different?
Well, I mean, I can certainly appreciate that that's his position. Ultimately, we slipped into an area where we're just asserting things that we believe that he believes because that's what his religion teaches. It really wasn't relevant to the discussion of the teleological argument or what we were discussing in this case, where I asked what was the purpose of tuning, like what is, if the universe is being tuned, who is it, what or who is it being tuned for?
Advanced life. Like I said, okay, so we can actually take that out. That's that's my view of and what I was just saying is that more fine tuning is required for that than for us to just simply be here. But to I guess give as far as just the teleology alone, the answer would be advanced life like ourselves, because the fine tuning grows for what is needed for bacteria, to plants and animals, to human beings to be here. So we require the most amount of fine-tuning in the universe is for us to be here.
Well, okay, so what then? I'm hearing you asserting that it's being okay. So you put us at the forefront.
It's not an assertion. Like the fine-tuning perimeters go up, they increase. Like more fine-tuning is needed for advanced life than say is needed for rocks, and then that's needed for bacteria, and for plants and so forth.
Okay, so we humans are.
Which would show us an intentional state.
Because
Because
humans are the advanced life that you are.
Why don't we let Mike respond, because he was in the middle of saying something there. I wanted to catch that.
I was just going to ask, real quick, humans are the advanced life you were referring to then?
yes,
So the universe is being fine-tuned for our benefit.
for advanced life. Because you cannot have any parameter that we have in the universe, and that's like what I showed with the fundamental, the fundamental forces breaking off, the precision that's required in them, the precision that's required in the evolution of the universe, the precision that's required for our solar system, for our planet, for the planetary collision which formed our moon. That's all this fine tuning is pointing towards for the same thing, and that's for advanced life to be here on planet Earth. In fact, like I said, like we have to have there's about 100 billion trillion stars, and we even have to have that amount of stars, no more, no less, for the chemistry to be possible for us to be here.
You give him a chance to respond on that, Travis.
That's that last thing is a little bit suspect, but I want to touch on this idea that, okay, so humans are the subjects by which the universe is being fine-tuned. I think that can be dismissed as an assertion for the following reason. If we look at even just our planet, let's be generous and say 98% of the planet that we live on, that was supposedly given to us, that is being fine-tuned for us, is fatal to human life. We can't go wherever we want to on this planet. Human life can only go about 30,000 feet up, 35,000 maybe. If you were to summit Mount Everest, you can only spend about 2 to 5 minutes on the summit because your body is literally beginning to shut down as you stand there. You have to leave as soon as you get there. You get 2 minutes to appreciate the view, and then you got to go. Otherwise, you're not going to survive simply because the atmosphere is not sustainable for anybody to be up there. Conversely, we can only go about, right now, humans, with the aid of technology that has gotten to this point, we can only go about 30,000 feet down. The average ocean depth is about a little over 2 miles deep, but when you talk about the I might be saying this wrong, Marianas Trench is much deeper. The deepest anyone has ever gone is about 7 miles. It's about 35,000 feet. You can't do it without extremely modern technology that would just simply prevent you from being crushed at that depth. That is not a, that's a very small amount of space when you consider that the crust is about 35 miles deep, and then the center of the Earth is about 4,000 miles. Yeah, 4,000 miles down. We have 7 miles of access with the aid of technology. Every other place we could possibly go is detrimental to our health. So it very much flies in the face that any aspect of this world, let alone the universe, is meant for our presence.
Okay, great. I'm glad you brought this up, and I want to be as charitable as I can. It kind of shows a lack of understanding of a lot of the earth science, because here's the thing. If we didn't have the atmospheric, conditions that we have in like the troposphere and so forth, then we don't have life. If we don't have the ocean depths that we have, we don't have life. If we don't have the hurricanes, the tornadoes, even forest fires, all these things must be meticulously exactly as they are in order for us to be here. So, excuse me. So what you would need to do is show how you can have us be here with these conditions, with the conditions you're talking about being met. In other words, if things were not exactly as they are, we humans could not exist. Even from like the function of viruses, bacteria, everything has to be precisely as it is in order for us to be here. So that objection just like simply falls apart.
That's not. First of all, that's not accurate at all.
Okay.
There are a lot of things about the universe that could be different, and it would still be conducive to human life. But that is not something I have to show. Hold on. No. you made the assertion that this universe, this world, let's confine it to the world before we even get to the universe. The world is made just for us and is being fine-tuned for us. And yet, the tuning I don't see, because if anything, the world is tuned to our detriment, because we can't go, again, we can't go anywhere we want to. We in fact are very limited to where we can live and how long we can live there. We can't even go to certain areas on the same plane. Like like we're currently at, I don't know where you live exactly, but if your current residence is at 2,000 feet above sea level, if you go 200 miles north and forget to bring a jacket, you could very well die of exposure, because just the temperature changes, the further you move away from the equator could be hazardous to you. So where is the design? You made the claim that this Earth was tuned for us. I then countered that by pointing out the fact that the state of the world shows very much the opposite. But then you told me that I had to show that somehow all of these things had to be conducive to life, or couldn't have, or that life couldn't, I forget exactly how you said it, that human life couldn't be here without all of these things. That is not my responsibility. I don't have to do that at all. The point was to counter what you said about how this planet was made just for us. And you haven't shown that that is necessarily, that has to be the case.
All right. I'll let you respond there, Travis, and we'll go to closing statements after this response.
Okay, yeah, cool. And I appreciate the conversation. It's interesting, but what we really need to realize is that, I totally understand what your objection is. It's like, well, why can't we, just exist, and go way up on the mountains and not have any problems, and like, why can't we have more liberties, and like, why are certain things fatal to us? And that kind of goes back to what I said before, that, it's tuned in such a way that we're here for a short amount of time. Now, what I'm saying is that everything on the earth, as far as like, the temperature, the hurricanes, the volcanism, the plate tectonics, the greenhouse gas removals that compensate for the increase in solar luminosity, all these factors, and even the things that you object to, must be exactly as they are in order for us to be here. Now, you said that was not true, but you would need to show scientifically, and I guarantee you can't. I studied this, that what could be different in order that you object to any different to still be here under these laws of physics. In other words,
we're shifting the burden here.
No, well, no, not really, because what I'm saying is that everything has to be precisely as it is. Like everything from the microscopic to the macro has to be precisely as it is in order for us to be here and even like having this conversation right now. It has to be like this.
Even if we assume, even if I granted that to you.
Your objection for like philosophical image. But I'm saying scientifically, all these factors have to be precise or we're not here. I'm sorry, like object to it philosophically, but I mean that's not even what I'm arguing.
I heard you there, Travis. Mike, we'll give you the last response here, and then we'll go into closings.
Okay. I'm getting this real bad static again. I don't know who's it is.
Yeah, I'm hearing it on your side right now.
I'm not. On whose side? My side?
I'm hearing it through the mics. Everybody, mute your mic. All right, Mike, turn yours on.
Okay.
All right, now make your statement.
Okay. I totally forgot what I was about to say. Okay.
It's usually Paulman's fault.
Ultimately, there at the end, I think first of all, I apologize for saying ultimately a lot, but what we ended with there was a shifting of the burden, and we rather than responding to the challenge that that was made about the world being made for human life, aka advanced life, it was shifted to say that that life couldn't be here. We couldn't be here unless everything was exactly the way it was. I'll put it this way. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I don't want to say that it is necessarily false. But even if it were true, that doesn't indicate that it was done deliberately. Okay, you fall into a trap of assumption that it was done deliberately, just because if it could simply be the fact that that's why life began as it was because the conditions were perfect for it. And I mean, the idea that this planet is the only planet that has life on it is pretty minimal. I personally find it hard to believe that we would be the only planet in the vastness of the universe that has life. It's certainly, and plus that assumption would also be conducive to, even if it was true that this planet was perfect for carbon-based life, that doesn't speak of the possibility of other forms of life that maybe aren't carbon-based like us. So the point that you asserted wasn't defended, and I didn't really appreciate the shifting of the burden where I have to suddenly defend the presence of life on the planet. So that's ultimate. That's basically, I'm going to finish that.
So space, the final frontier, right?
Right.
Right on, gentlemen. Okay, well, we're going to jump in with Travis's closing statement. You've got 3 minutes to sum up everything and, end us out there on yours, and then we'll jump to Mike's for his closing.
Okay, great. And so to kind of cap on everything, my first argument is that a lot of phenomena occurring on the subatomic level is what we, again, like, sorry, the thing cut off. What I was saying is that a lot of what we, examine on the subatomic level can be explained in terms of computer science and information processing. Everything that happens is like binary digits, ones and zeros, functioning like a quantum computer. My argument was that a source of intelligence is required to process the information that functions as a computer. Then I touched on how we have to have everything exactly as it is, from the strong and weak nuclear force constants, the gravitational force constants, electromagnetism, and protons and neutrons and so forth. And then, like with our planet, it has to be the precise distance from the sun. We have to have the precision we have in the silicate erosion process for the greenhouse gas over the past 3.5 billion years. We have to have all these things precisely as they are for us to be here. And my argument was that with everything pointing in the same direction, it shows a state of intentionality. And one thing I did want to touch on, I apologize to Mike if you thought I was shifting the burden. What I was simply doing is saying that everything has to be exactly the way it is. And I thought I heard you say, no, that's not the case. And that I'm pretty confident that is the scientific consensus. So I was simply asking, well, what could be different and we still be here? I wasn't trying to put the burden on you, and I was kind of wanting some clarification. But basically, if anything was off about the universe, or other than we have it right now, life as we know it, any carbon-based life would not be possible. And as far as I know, scientists are unanimous that the only kind of life that can exist is carbon-based life. So I heard some objections, mainly philosophical objections to why things are the way they are here on the planet, but I did not hear a rebuttal to any of the argumentation I presented. And with that, I'll go ahead and close that.
All right, Mike, you're up.
Unfortunately, I ended up diving right into how I was going to close in that last exchange. I pretty much touched on everything I had already written out for myself. So I guess I'll just kind of wing it. The whole idea behind the teleological argument is this assertion that things are, the world is complex, the universe is complex, we exist, and the idea that we could just have arisen through natural processes is too great an assumption to be made. Therefore, a designer must have been involved somehow. And unfortunately, that it just too much of that hinges on a lot of assumption, assertion, people beginning with beliefs that they already have, and following and trying to justify those beliefs based on a preformed conclusion rather than following the evidence that is to its natural logical conclusion. And we touched on a number of those here. I kind of am wishing this was going on a little longer, but we could touch on a few more things. But ultimately, and there's that word again, that it wasn't done here. Let's just put it that way. And I'll close it, leave it with that.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that was ultimately very fun.
I ultimately enjoyed that.
I really did. But
I
you know what?
had a lot of fun here.
It's all good, man. Hey, we're just a bunch of guys just hanging around, chilling, and talking theology and apologetics.
Yeah.
So we appreciate both of you guys coming onto the show. And like I said, I always keep an open door. So maybe you guys can come back on in the future. Maybe we'll do this argument again. Teleological. Well, I can't even say it either. See, you're not the only one with ultimate problems here. But I mean, just have you guys back on maybe to discuss this again. It was very interesting and very thought-provoking. Why don't you guys just go ahead and tell us where we can find you on the internet one more time. Mike, we'll start with you. Where can we find you at again?
I have a small Facebook channel called Theological Crossroads. It's been around for a while. It used to have a different name. We changed the name to something a little more inclusive. I won't bother saying what the old name was. And I actually have some old YouTube videos. If anyone is even slightly interested, they're very old. I haven't made a video in a long time. They're few, but what is my YouTube channel name? I totally just blanked on my own YouTube channel name. I think it's like Big Daddy 1978. That's what it is, which is an old nickname from college. Don't blame me. I didn't give it to myself.
Right on. So Theological Crossroads on Facebook and your YouTube channel at Big Daddy 1978, and we'll put that in the.
If I can find it, I'll put that in the description.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, I just totally. I'm an idiot. Biggest of Daddies. That's what it was.
Biggest of Daddies.
Biggest of Daddies. That's my YouTube channel. And
Right on.
again, nickname given to me by friends. I didn't choose it. So yes.
Well, again, thanks, Mike, for being here. We greatly appreciate it, and glad we had some fun doing this. Travis, how about you tell us where we can find you?
I'm on Facebook a lot. Travis Worth. I'm real familiar with this guy right here, David Paulman. I've known him for like quite a while, coming on a year almost.
Yeah.
But Travis Worth on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, with that, gentlemen, we're going to close the show. David, close us out, man.
All right. And by the way, Mike, don't sign off right away as soon as the show's over, because I do have to ask you one thing. But thanks everyone for tuning in. What's the next up on the docket? Are we doing the biological design argument, or are we going to moral argument after this?
We could do either.
All right.
Leaving it open.
All right, we got another great debate coming up at some point in the future, so definitely tune in for that, and catch you all later.
Sounds good.
All right. Y'all take care.
Yep. Have a good one.
Still recording.
I noticed.
Stop! I keep hitting the wrong thing. It keeps passing you, man.